to be honest, I think there are a lot of people that are in kind of contemporary death metal that came from hardcore and punk, right? And the musicianship, there are great, talented people from that world, but I think, you know, that's not like a requirement, and also hardcore and punk is a very like emotive genre. So I think that this style of death metal translates well to those people.
Welcome to the Dreams of Consciousness podcast. If you'd be so kind, would you mind introducing yourself?
My name is Justin DeTore. I play Innumerable Forms.
And Justin, how would you describe the music of Innumerable Forms?
Well, I guess I would call it Death Doom. You know, when it originally started, that was the goal of the band to do something that was, kind of a tribute to the 90s bands that I really loved that were of that style. I think, we still play Death Doom, though I think we definitely have our own identity now. But still, inspired by kind of old Finnish death metal, UK death doom, UK doom, a little bit of American doom. So yeah,
And you mentioned that when the band formed, the style was the intention was to emulate these '90s bands. I believe the band started as a solo project. Is that correct?
that is correct.
Why a solo project? Why did you decide to start this on your own?
Well, I kind of did it on a whim. And also, to be honest with you, I didn't know anyone locally, at least, that was into that style, really. Most of the bands, like Demigod, Disgrace, God Macabre, a lot of that stuff was still, hadn't been repressed. It was still fairly, obscure, I guess you could say. I just didn't know anyone that was interested in playing that style of music, really. Most of the guys that I knew that were into that stuff that got me into it were from other places. And this is also before you could really like do a band via the internet,
Right, right.
like the technology just wasn't there yet. So
Would this have been circa 2007, 2008, something like that?
yeah, this would be yeah the first Innumerable Forms recordings I did were in 2007. Yeah.
When did you decide to start expanding into a full lineup?
Well, I had recorded the 7 inch with someone else. He played the lead guitar stuff, but I did everything else. And I was just enthusiastic about it. I wanted to play live. I had become friends with the guys who were in Mammoth Grinder and Hatred Surge. So I asked them if they wanted to play and kind of be like the backing band, so to speak. They said yes. And they were always playing shows. I was always playing shows. So, it seemed like just a fun thing to do, and they were totally down. So that's kind of how it started. We had other guys that joined in later, but that was like the original core group.
Was part of the reason why you decided to expand to a full lineup to play shows mainly?
Yeah, yeah, to play shows. The two recordings after the Dark Worship EP, those were also done mostly by myself and Chris Corey, the guy that recorded. He played leads on the Frozen to Death tape, which became the split with Blessed Awful, and the tape that came after that. But that I played everything else. But then, the more that we started to play, the more it felt like a real band, right? So after that, I was like, what, we should all just record it together. We're like a band. I want input from everybody. I want people to bring riffs to the table, bring ideas, etc. So yeah, that's kind of what happened. It evolved pretty naturally.
At some point, you moved to just doing vocals.
Yeah.
Why was that?
Well, number one, the guys that I had playing live were all better at their instruments than I was. So like, Connor's a better drummer than I am. The guy that played before Brian, he was better. So I'm not like a really like a death metal drummer, really. I'm definitely not like a great guitar player either. So Chris and Jensen are way better. So it was just easier for me to do vocals. And plus I was only doing vocals live as well. I wasn't playing guitar or drums or anything. So, it felt right for me just to start doing vocals.
Do you still contribute riffs to the songs?
Yeah, I do. I would say that my contribution riff wise has definitely diminished, compared to the first LP and even the second LP. I would say that maybe this last one, I probably contributed maybe like 10% of the riffs. Everything else was Chris and Jensen. Like I still, I was part of the arrangements and all that. But like as far as like pure riff writing goes, like I'm just gonna leave it to them. from now on for the most part.
Do Chris and Jensen also have a similar background in terms of liking the old Finnish and UK doom death doom bands from the 90s?
I would say so. I would say that Jensen is probably less of a doom guy and more just, kind of traditional death metal as far as his taste goes. And Chris likes both. Chris is definitely like a doom lord for sure. But yeah, so a lot of the more doom. Well, I don't know. Actually, Jensen can write some good doom parts too, even if he doesn't think that's his wheelhouse. He's pretty good at that. But Chris for sure. And yeah, I'll still as far as riffs go, the ones that I like to write the most are the doom style riffs.
Would you say that the sound has evolved as Chris and Jensen started adding more to the songwriting,
Yeah,
contributing more to the songwriting?
definitely. I mean, not only has it evolved, I think it's just gotten better, because I think those guys are talented guys, they're good songwriters. Like they understand the psychology of the music and what we're trying to do. So yeah, and also, because they're two different people, like their riffs aren't going to sound exactly like mine. So like, we have no choice but to be a little bit different than what it was when I was the, sole songwriter.
So, how does the process for songwriting usually go these days?
Well, these days, what we usually do, all three of us will kind of write some riffs on our own. Oftentimes, if we're planning on, writing for a record, we'll get together a few times. Jensen lives in Seattle, Chris lives in Philadelphia, I live in Boston, but we'll usually meet in Philly. And Connor will come up too and play drums, or I'll even play drums if he's not available. And we'll kind of, bring all the riffs together, all the ideas together, and we just start writing. So, we'll do it in like, you know, I don't know, maybe like a session that lasts for like 2 or 3 days, try to get as much done as we can, hopefully, come up with a couple of songs. That's been the formula, I would say, for the past, I don't know, maybe 5 years.
Why do you prefer writing in person, or I guess arranging in person, as opposed to trading files back and forth?
Well, I would say that especially for this style, it's an intuitive style. It's easier, I think, to arrange all together because it's way more feeling based. It's not so much like, some death metal, it's like part, 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 and I feel like we're not like that. And a lot of times when we're all playing together, the vision that I had originally totally changes because, there's when you're playing with the full band, there's shifts in momentum. There's, parts that you feel like, oh, it fit when I was just playing it via Logic or GarageBand, but when everyone is there, it doesn't feel right. So, I mean, that's at least for this style, a more like emotive, kind of intuitive based style. I definitely think that playing or jamming with a band is the way to go.
in terms of, these 2 to 3 day jam sessions that you guys have, or jam slash arranging sessions that you have, how much of the album was put together in that way?
I would say, well, me and Chris got together a few times, just us to put a couple of songs together. But I would say that the majority of the songs came together with Jensen and with Connor. Connor, is a much better drummer than I am, totally understands the style, brings his own thing to it. But I don't know, I would say maybe like 5 or 6 sessions, we were probably able to get pretty much all the songs. I think we're 8 or 9 songs.
So the album that we're talking about is called Pain Effulgence.
Correct.
And at the time that we're having this conversation, it will be released at the end of the week through Profound Lore Records. So we spoke a little bit about how the band has evolved since you first started it as a solo project, as well as the writing sessions for this album. Did you go into the album with a vision in mind, or a purpose, or maybe wanting to do something different than you had done in the past?
Well, I mean, I was, to be honest, I was pretty happy with how the last one came out. That, to me, the last one was kind of the realization of my vision, like early on. You know what I mean? Like that true mix of, kind of classic Finnish death metal with doom parts, and I kind of accomplished everything that I wanted to do, kind of within that framework. So I felt good about that. So this one, Jensen mentioned that he wanted a little bit more death metal than Doom. I bet you people probably would assume that this new one would be way more on the Doom side, because I think that's just kind of the way that we've been trending. But actually, like, I think there's way more kind of brutal, classic death metal parts on this new one. Obviously, the Doom is still there, but that was kind of the vision that Jensen brought, and I was on board. Chris was on board. Connor, we all thought that would be cool. That would also be kind of like a curveball, I think, because even like the tape that we did last was pretty doomy. Like, definitely the two most doom songs that we had ever written. So yeah, I guess the vision was, faster, brutal, more visceral, I guess, than the last one.
You mentioned that you got most of the songwriting done in 5 to 6 sessions. When did you actually start working on the album?
Let's see. We actually started working on the album earlier than you would think, because the last one we recorded in late 2020 into early 2021. There was a bit of delay as far as like the mixing process went. It didn't come out till 2022. So I think we had started working on the record, working on this new one before the last one came out. So probably like summer of 2022. And we kind of worked all the way until late 2024 on it. A lot of the other guys have other bands and whatnot, of course. So, there would be periods where we didn't get together for 3 or 4 months just because everyone was so busy.
Where did you end up recording the album?
Well, we did it with the guy who did the last record. That's Arthur Rizek. And we actually did it at his home studio in Easton, Pennsylvania. We recorded all the music there. And I like to do the vocals on my own just because I'm very particular, and I just didn't want to like punish the guy with like take after take. So I actually did the vocals in Boston on my own.
Did you do it at home, or did you go to a studio?
I did it at home, yeah. Yep, I did it at home.
So I think people will know Arthur Rizek from the bands that he's produced, like Power Trip. He's worked with a lot of, I mean,
Yeah.
almost all the metal bands. But
Yeah, he's awesome. He's a great friend. He's a bandmate. He's a really talented engineer, producer. And he actually, he brought a lot to the table as far as, kind of production choices and certain things like that. Like it's a real like asset to have a guy who knows the style, who like understands the music, and because he really brings a lot to the table as far as just understanding the psychology and what to do if we're like confused on certain parts or if we're uncertain of things. So a lot of the record you kind of have, give him credit for. And not just like mixing or engineering wise. We're talking like arrangements and certain things like that. Leads as well. Like he's really good as far as like understanding like what each song needs.
And you've worked with him since the Despotic Rule EP, right?
Yeah, yeah, that was the first Innumerable Forms record that we did together. I worked on other projects with him for other bands, but that was the first Innumerable Forms record that he worked on. First Innumerable Forms recording.
What did you want him to bring to the finished sound of the album, as far as the mix and the master?
You, I well, first of all, I didn't want it to sound like this kind of processed modern death metal sound that I think a lot of new recordings have. It works for some bands. I just don't think it would work for us. He's always a guy who I think he might be the best guy that can mix like old school with new school, like so where it still sounds great. It still sounds professional, you could say, but it has that old school flavor and it sounds real. Like I still think this record it sounds like four guys in a room, like as a band playing the songs. You know what I mean? I can't say that for like a ton of new modern metal releases, sadly.
Production wise, do you feel like the sound is a little bit retro?
Yeah. I don't think it's retro for the sake of being retro, but I think that like the best dynamics and elements of like the retro old school sound, I think are represented in the recording.
Yeah. I mean, I grew up on like Old Paradise Lost and Old Bride, and
Yeah,
especially with the leads. Like when I hear the leads, like it really takes me back to that time.
for sure. And that's what we're going for. Like I said, a mix of Finnish death metal with UK doom has always been kind of the what we had in mind. So I'm glad that invokes that for you.
Do you feel that live is a place where people will really experience innumerable forms as what it should be?
Yeah, probably. People have said that to me. I think that, well, I think we've been able to capture the live sound better on these past few recordings. But I still think that maybe our bread and butter is playing live. I think there's like a certain intensity that's there. At least that's what people have said. I feel it. I think maybe that's like that comes from our like punk and hardcore roots. Like it's not just going to be like guys standing there playing the songs. Like it's going to be energetic. It's going to be aggressive and emotive. At least I hope so.
Do you guys get to tour regularly?
Not regularly. We've done some tours. We did Europe in late summer, fall of 2022. That was the last time we did like a tour. We toured Australia in 2013, which was amazing. I would love to do that again. And I'm hoping in 2026 we can play more shows. That's kind of the goal. We'll see. Obviously, we'll see what happens. But like, if we could do more shows in the States, if we can do overseas again, that would also be amazing.
Is the issue scheduling around Genocide Pack and Mammoth Grinder and the other projects?
Yeah, Power Trip, Iron Lung, like yeah, and the bands you mentioned, of course, and also just kind of real life stuff, family stuff. We're all a little bit older, so there's a lot of like responsibility to go around. So it's harder to tour now than it would have been when we were like 22.
Yeah, yeah. We're coming to the end of festival season, but do you guys have any plans for the rest of the summer or maybe the rest of the year?
Well, for summertime, we're playing some shows next week. We're going to be playing Philadelphia, Richmond, and New York, and then early to mid-September, we're going to do Boston and Baltimore. So I'm excited about that. But like, that's all we really have on our plate right now. Wish we could do more. Like I said, 2026, I want to try to like really hit it, see what we can do, especially since the record's going to be out by then.
You mentioned when you first started the band, there weren't a lot of other bands doing this, except like the classic bands that you mentioned, the old Finnish and UK bands. Now there's actually quite a sizable scene. Does that make it easier to like book shows in terms of like
Yeah.
finding touring partners and things like that?
Yeah, I would say so. Our first, the first time Form started playing was probably like 2009, I think, 2009, 2010. To be honest, there weren't a lot of like kind of, quote unquote, old school death metal bands to play with. So a lot of times we would play kind of mixed shows. We'd play with, like grindcore bands, some more like kind of metallic, hardcore bands, crust bands. That's kind of like the scene that we like fell into. It wasn't until like, early to mid 2010s that we would play like kind of like pure death metal shows. But it's great.
How do you feel about that? Did you like the old mixed shows, or do you prefer having like a
Yeah, I like both, like there were some shows we played. I don't know if people really I think people thought it was cool and respected it, but it wasn't their thing really. But it was always cool to play those. But I mean, given the choice, I suppose I would rather play with bands that are, more within like the death metal, death doom realm.
yeah? And I have to assume that the audience has grown.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. But even those shows back then were always pretty cool. But yeah, like to have played a show with more than like 150 people, like felt kind of like unheard of then for us at least. But now, it seems like there's like a sizable scene in most cities when it comes to kind of dark death metal that I feel like wasn't there before. I mean, obviously we weren't like the first band to do it. There was still a lot of bands that kind of were playing that style, but I just didn't know of a lot of kind of younger bands or newer bands from the region that was playing that style. There, like I said, there were a few, but it's obviously way different now.
Yeah. I mean, I'm still in the headspace of like, going to shows in the 90s where it was like
Yeah,
me and 50 other people, you know what I mean?
yeah. Well, that's the thing. I feel like, I saw a lot of those bands in the 90s and the early 2000s. Even back then, they just didn't really draw. You know what I mean? Like maybe just that style just was never like a real big thing, at least not in the States.
I mean, I think a lot of it was the death metal fans at the time were very much about technique, the technical side.
Yes, for sure.
And whatever you want to say about, Paradise Lost or My Dying Bride and their how good they were as songwriters, they were never about technique. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like it wasn't about like mind blowing guitar playing. It was more about like what you're talking about, the feeling, the emotions behind the music and stuff like that.
Right. Yeah, totally. And you're right. It seems like, I mean, maybe that was more appreciated overseas. But yeah, I didn't see Paradise Lost in the 90s. I remember I started listening to them kind of around the Draconian Times record. So that was probably like 95, 96.
Yeah, that's when I got into them too.
But yeah, I spoke to friends who saw them in the 90s, like when they would come over here, and they're like, yeah, it was just like never that big, you know?
Yeah. So yeah, it is kind of it's not something I expect when I go to a show like Spectral or whoever, and it's sold out. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah,
Like,
Spectral Voice, you mean?
yeah, Spectral Voice. Sorry.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, totally. I totally understand that. But yeah, I mean, you got to give them respect. They're one of the bands that really kind of, you know, took that genre and really like you said, they play big shows. They kill it, so you got to give them respect. And they're a great band too, so it's totally well deserved. And they were doing it early on too. I feel like they were one of the first like kind of like death doom bands to really kind of blow up, at least in the States. But yeah, but even like I'll talk to guys who saw like Autopsy even like in the early 90s and stuff, and they were like, yeah, it was cool, but it wasn't like they weren't playing like big shows. Like I said, that the non-tech style, it just wasn't. It just I don't know. It just wasn't a thing here.
I mean, I've heard more people cite Asphyx as an influence in the last 10 years, and I actually know people who are listening to Asphyx when they were releasing albums,
Yeah, I believe that.
myself included, honestly.
Yeah, I believe that. Like the first guys that I ever met that were really deep into like dark obscure death metal were the guys who played in Funebrarm and Evoken, like that kind of crew of New Jersey guys.
Right. Yeah.
They've been representing that stuff forever. So you got to give them respect too. And they, you know, when they were kind of playing those shows like in like the late 90s, early 2000s, like it seemed like the crowds weren't huge either. So I'm so happy that now they're kind of getting the recognition that they deserve and they're playing big shows, they're playing festivals and stuff like that because those are guys that deserve it.
Why do you think this style has such a large audience now?
I don't know. Well, I think that to be honest, I think there are a lot of people from that are in kind of contemporary death metal that came from hardcore and punk, right?
Right. Yeah. Absolutely.
And the musicianship, there are great, talented people from that world, but I think, you know, that's not like a requirement, and also hardcore and punk is a very like emotive genre. So I think that this style of death metal translates well to those people.
Yeah, and I've spoken to a few guys who came from the hardcore scene and are currently playing in like old school death metal bands.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of people that came from that world.
Yeah.
Myself included, like I consider myself more of like a hardcore guy, like, and a lot of the guys like in Innumerable Forms, same thing. And a lot of the guys that play in, like you said, in like, kind of old school death metal bands, death doom bands, like maybe they're not like, you know, hard on their sleeve, like hardcore punk rock guys, but they definitely like, you know, either came from that world or like at least had like a foot in that world.
Do you think that the main difference in the people who came from the hardcore world is that they weren't about like the technical side or the musicianship as much as like maybe the emotions or the feeling that the music created?
Yeah, I mean, I bet that, I mean, like I said, there are guys from that came from that world that are, extremely talented, extremely technical and proficient musicians. But like I said, I think that, maybe they're more open-minded to the kind of death metal that's not super technical.
Yeah, I mean, I was always a huge Bolt Thrower fan.
Yeah. I mean, they were punk guys for sure.
Yeah, and that was a band that wasn't really that that respected for their musicianship.
Right.
But it's in the last 10, 15 years that, like you said, like people who came over from the hardcore scene like appreciated stuff like Bolt Thrower and Hypocrisy
Oh yeah.
for their songwriting and not necessarily for the Bolt Thrower beat or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, my friend Ian saw a Bull Thrower in Boston in the early '90s. He said there may be like 50 people at the show at most, and then when they played Chaos and Chaos in 2013, it was huge. They played in like a packed like airport hangar, like to I mean a lot of metal people, but a lot of like crust punkers and punk people. So,
Yeah.
and I'm sure if they play now, it would be gigantic.
So by the time people hear this episode, Pain Effulgence will be out through Profound Lore Records. Justin, please tell everyone how they can order the album. What's the best way to get it?
Well, I mean, you can get it directly from Profound Lore. That's what you should probably do. You can order it through our Bandcamp as well. That's innumerableforms.bandcamp.com. Those are the two best ways to do it, I would say. Yeah.
And do you want to say anything about the vinyl versions that are coming out? Two versions that Profound Lore is doing.
Yeah, I mean there's obviously a color variant, right? I can't remember how many were pressed. Those usually go pretty fast. So yeah, I mean I think there's still time to get it. But yeah, but also I already heard the black vinyl version and it sounds amazing. So at least I think so.
And if people want to get updates on tours and things like that, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, so we don't have an Instagram. We don't have a big social media presence, but Profound Lore will always post our tour dates or if we're doing anything new. I think you can find that all the information also on our Bandcamp, also through Jensen's Instagram, Iron Lung Records. He posts stuff too because he's in the band. So like, it's out there. If you look at any of those places, you'll be able to kind of follow us.
Does all the merch also go through the Bandcamp page?
Yeah, well, Profound Lore has a long sleeve available that we designed. I haven't posted any merch in a while, but any merch that we have left over from these shows, and I assume we will, I'll post it on the Bandcamp within a week. You can definitely buy it through Bandcamp, through our Bandcamp.
Is there anything else you want to say, or any updates about your other projects?
Yeah, I mean, expect one of my other bands called Dream Unending to do a tour in November, a new record sometime after that. I'm in a band with Arthur called Summerlands, and we're gonna do a new record eventually. I don't know when, but like we've been talking about it. As far as anything else, I mean, I guess, you know, thanks for the support all the years. Like I said, we've been a band for a long time, haven't done much. We didn't do a lot until maybe like 6 or 7 years ago. So thanks for sticking around. Yeah, I hope that you enjoy this latest record. It's my personal favorite. I think everybody else in the band agrees.
Very cool. Thank you so much, Justin.
Yeah, thank you.